Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Let me tell you about the time my brother-in-law decided to be a real jerk to my sister. I've always been close with her, even though we grew up in different households after our parents split. She's the artistic type, loves her cozy mugs and cute kitchen stuff. It's her thing, you know. So, my sister met this guy a few years back. He seemed okay at first, but looking back, there were some red flags. Always had to have things his way, never really respected her interests, but she was head over heels, and before we knew it, they were married. Fast forward to a few months ago. My sister tells me they're moving to Arkansas to be closer to his family. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I wanted to support her. She was packing up their stuff, and I remember her mentioning how careful she wanted to be with her mug collection. Then one day, I get this call from her. She's crying, and I can barely make out what she's saying. I asked her to slow down and tell me what happened. Through her sobs, she explained that her husband had thrown away all her mugs. He had promised to pack them and bring them later, but instead, he just got rid of them. I was furious. Those mugs meant a lot to her. Some were gifts, some she'd collected on trips. It wasn't just about the mugs, it was about him completely disregarding something she cared about. I asked if she had confronted him about it. She said she tried, but he just shrugged it off, claiming they were taking up too much space and that she didn't need them anyway. I could hear the defeat in her voice. This wasn't the first time he'd done something like this, but it was definitely the worst. I knew I had to do something, so I called up our dad and stepmom. Dad was just as angry as I was when I told him what happened. He expressed his disgust at my brother-in-law's behavior using some colorful language, then declared we needed to do something about it. Stepmom chimed in, expressing sympathy for my sister and how heartbroken she must be. We came up with a plan. It wasn't much, but we wanted to show my sister some support and maybe irritate her husband a bit in the process. Dad sent her a couple of nice mugs. Nothing fancy, but good quality. Stepmom, bless her heart, went a step further. She knew my sister only had one pan in the new place, some pink thing her husband picked out. So she sent her a whole set of blue diamond pots and pans. Me, I decided to go all out. I found these adorable ceramic marshmallow mugs online, a cookie mug with a built-in cookie holder, and an Oreo mug set complete with cookie tongs. But the pièce de résistance? A cookie dunker. It's this little gadget designed specifically for dunking cookies in milk without getting your fingers wet. Totally useless, but absolutely perfect. A week later, I got another call from my sister. She was ecstatic, exclaiming how amazing we all were. I figured the packages had arrived, and she confirmed it. She gushed about how adorable the mugs were, how amazing the pans were, and how much she loved the cookie dunker. I could hear the joy in her voice, but there was something else too. I asked how her husband had reacted. She told me he wasn't happy, constantly muttering about clutter and wasted money. But she didn't care. She loved everything. I reassured her that the items were hers and her husband didn't get a say in it. She agreed and thanked me, expressing how much it all meant to her. We chatted for a while longer, and I could tell she was feeling better. It wasn't just about replacing the stuff her husband threw away. It was about showing her that she mattered, that her interests and feelings were valid. Over the next few weeks, I heard that her husband was getting increasingly annoyed with all the new kitchen stuff. Apparently, he tried to accidentally break one of the mugs, but my sister caught him in the act and gave him an earful. The last I heard, my sister was standing up for herself more. She's even talking about taking some art classes, something her husband always discouraged. It's a small victory, but it's a start. And every time she uses one of those mugs or pans, I hope she remembers that she's got people in her corner who love and support her no matter what. I've been blind since birth due to a rare genetic condition. My parents have always encouraged me to be independent, so when I turned 16, they helped me get a guide dog and learn how to navigate public spaces on my own. It's been challenging, but I've managed pretty well so far. That day, I decided to treat myself to some shopping. My mom dropped me off at the mall entrance, and I made my way inside. That was my guide dog leading the way. After a couple of hours of retail therapy, I was ready to head home. I called my mom to pick me up, and she said she'd be there in about 20 minutes. I decided to wait outside, enjoying the warm sun on my face. My guide dog and I found an empty bench near the parking lot, and I sat down to wait. That's when all the trouble started. I heard the sound of a car pulling up nearby, followed by an angry voice. A woman, who I'd later come to think of as Karen, yelled at me to move my car, saying she needed to park there. At first, I thought she must be talking to someone else. There were no cars parked near me, just the empty bench where I was sitting. I asked if she was talking to me, confused by her demand. She confirmed that she was indeed addressing me, insisting that I move my car immediately. She complained about driving around for 10 minutes looking for a spot and accused me of just sitting there, taking up space. I was puzzled. Did she think I was in a car? I tried to explain that I wasn't in a car and was just sitting on the bench waiting for my ride. But Karen wouldn't listen. She accused me of lying, claiming she could see me sitting in a fancy sports car. She threatened to call security if I didn't move. I realized she must be seeing my guide dog and mistaking it for a car somehow. I tried to explain again, telling her that there had been a misunderstanding. I told her that I was blind, and that what she saw was my guide dog, not a car. We were just waiting on the bench, I assured her. Karen dismissively brushed off my explanation, calling it the lamest excuse she'd ever heard. She claimed I didn't look blind and demanded that I take off my sunglasses to prove it. I was starting to feel really uncomfortable. I didn't want to remove my sunglasses. They help protect my sensitive eyes from bright light. But I also didn't want this confrontation to escalate further. I politely declined to take off my sunglasses, explaining that they were prescription and that I needed them. I pleaded with her to believe me when I said I was blind and there was no car. But Karen had had enough. She declared she was done with my supposed lies. Before I could react, I felt a hand grabbing at my face. The woman snatched my sunglasses off and threw them to the ground. I heard a sickening crunch as she stomped on them. I cried out in protest, telling her to stop and that those were my prescription glasses. Karen suddenly realized I really was blind. She sounded shocked and tried to justify her actions by asking why I hadn't just said so earlier. I was in shock. My expensive custom-made sunglasses were destroyed, and this woman had the audacity to act like it was my fault for not convincing her sooner. I reminded her that I had told her multiple times, but she just wouldn't listen. Suddenly, I heard another voice join the conversation. A passerby questioned what was going on and asked Karen if she had just assaulted me. Karen tried to brush him off, telling him to mind his own business, but the passerby persisted, saying he had witnessed her grabbing my face and destroying my property. He informed her that he was calling the police. Karen panicked and tried to stop him, claiming it was just a misunderstanding. The passerby ignored her pleas and called the police anyway. While we waited for them to arrive, he stayed with me to make sure I was okay and to keep the woman from leaving the scene. When the police arrived, they took statements from all of us. The woman tried to downplay what happened, but the passerby's eyewitness account and the evidence of my broken sunglasses were enough for them to take action. A police officer told Karen that she was under arrest for assault and destruction of property and began reading her rights. I heard Karen protesting, claiming she didn't know I was really blind and that it was unfair. The police officer assured me they would be pressing charges and asked if I wanted to file additional charges myself. I agreed, feeling it was important to stand up for myself and hopefully prevent this woman from treating others this way in the future. My mom arrived shortly after, horrified by what had happened. She hugged me tightly and thanked the passerby for his help. We exchanged contact information with him in case he needed to provide a witness statement later. It wasn't the first time someone had doubted my disability, but it was certainly the most aggressive encounter I'd experienced. I was shaken but also grateful for the kindness of the passerby who stepped in to help. I had to testify at a hearing about the incident. The woman was found guilty and ordered to pay for replacement sunglasses, along with additional fines and community service. I hope she learned something from this experience, but more importantly, I hope my story might help others understand the challenges blind people face and encourage them to be more compassionate and understanding. I've been living in this apartment with my son for about 5 years now. We moved here after my divorce, looking for a fresh start in a quiet neighborhood. It's not the fanciest place, but it's cozy and close to my son's school. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, so I'm always conscious about noise. From day one, I made sure we were considerate neighbors. My son and I have a strict no running indoors rule. We use headphones when watching TV or listening to music, and we even put felt pads under all our furniture to minimize noise when moving things around. I thought we were doing everything right, but the lady living below us, she's been a nightmare from the start. It began with occasional thumps on her ceiling, our floor, whenever we'd walk around. I figured maybe we were being louder than we thought, so we started tiptoeing everywhere. But it didn't stop there. One day I ran into her in the hallway. I tried to introduce myself as her upstairs neighbor and expressed hope that we hadn't been too noisy. She scowled and accused us of always stomping around upstairs, calling it ridiculous. I apologized if we had disturbed her and assured her we'd try to be quiet, asking if there was a particular time that bothered her. She angrily replied that it was all the time and demanded we stop moving altogether. Before I could respond, she stormed off, leaving me stunned and wondering how we were supposed to stop moving. Things escalated from there. She'd bang on her ceiling at random times, even when we were sleeping or sitting quietly. I tried talking to her again, but she just slammed the door in my face. I spoke to our landlord, but he said he couldn't do much unless there was proof of harassment. The other neighbors told me she'd been living here for decades and had always been difficult. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to loud thumping. At first, I thought someone was at the door, but then I realized it was coming from below. I got out of bed and found my son standing in the hallway, looking scared. I tried to comfort him and told him to go back to bed. He asked why she was so mad at us when we weren't doing anything. I admitted I didn't know and suggested some people are just unhappy. When he asked if we could move, I told him we shouldn't have to because of one person and that we should try to ignore it. But ignoring it was getting harder. The lack of sleep was affecting both of us. My son's grades were slipping, and I was having trouble concentrating on work. I felt helpless and angry. Then, one morning at about 4 a.m. as the banging started again, I had an idea. It was petty, I'll admit, but I was at my wit's end. I called the police. I told the operator I was concerned about my downstairs neighbor, explaining she was elderly and lived alone, and that I kept hearing banging noises from her apartment. I expressed worry that she might have fallen and was trying to signal for help. The operator thanked me for reporting it and said they'd send someone to check on her right away. I went back to bed. About 20 minutes later, I heard voices in the hallway. I peeked out and saw 2 police officers talking to Karen. She was shouting that she was fine and that we upstairs were the problem. The officer tried to calm her down, explaining that her neighbor was concerned for her well-being. Karen accused us of lying and trying to harass her. The officer calmly stated they were just doing their job and that if there was no emergency they'd be on their way, but asked her to keep the noise down as it was late and people were trying to sleep. The next morning, for the first time in months, my son and I woke up feeling rested. My son happily noted how quiet it had been the night before. I agreed, and when he asked if I thought she would stop now, I expressed hope that she would. To my surprise and relief, the nightly banging stopped after that. I saw Karen in the hallway a few days later. She glared at me but didn't say anything. I gave her a polite nod and went on my way. It's been a few weeks now, and things have been peaceful. My son's grades are improving, and I'm able to focus on my work again. I know what I did wasn't exactly right, but sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, I guess. I still feel a bit guilty, but when I see my son smiling and hear him laughing freely in our home without fear of setting off our neighbor, I know I made the right choice. We deserve to live in peace, and if it took a little white lie to make that happen, so be it. I've been living in this gated community for about 5 years now. It's a nice place, quiet and well maintained, but sometimes the rules can be a bit much. When I first moved here, I was drawn to the beautiful landscaping and the promise of a peaceful neighborhood. Little did I know I'd end up dealing with the most incompetent property manager on the planet. Our community has these super narrow streets. I mean, they're so tight, you could probably reach out and touch both sides if you stretched. Because of this, the Homeowners Association has always had a strict no parking rule on the streets. It makes sense, really. If someone parked on the road, emergency vehicles wouldn't be able to get through if there was a problem. I remember when I first learned about this rule during the homeowners orientation. The previous property manager, who was actually competent, explained it clearly. He told us there was no parking on the streets, ever, and that it was for everyone's safety. We all nodded and agreed. It seemed reasonable enough. Fast forward to last week. I was taking my usual evening walk when I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. There were two vehicles parked on opposite sides of our narrow street, a pickup truck and a van. They were completely blocking the road. If there was an emergency, there's no way an ambulance or fire truck could get through. I quickly pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. Then I sent it to our new property manager, who'd been on the job for about 6 months. I messaged the property manager reporting a serious parking violation on Oak Street. I explained that two vehicles were blocking the road completely and that it was a safety hazard. The property manager's reply was baffling. He thanked me for the update on parking and then said that parking for contractors wasn't enforced when they were working on a home. He added that if I thought otherwise, I should let him know as soon as I saw it, so they could enforce it. I had to read his message twice. It made absolutely no sense. If parking wasn't being enforced, how could I think otherwise? And how could he enforce something he just said wasn't being enforced? I decided to spell it out for him. I replied, explaining that this went against the Homeowners Association's long-standing no parking rule. I emphasized that it was a safety issue and that emergency vehicles wouldn't be able to get through if needed. The property manager's response was equally frustrating. He said he appreciated my input and would pass the information on to the board of directors for consideration. At this point, I was fuming. Pass it on to the board? This wasn't some new rule I was suggesting. This was an established policy that had been in place since before I moved in. It was clear this guy had no idea what he was doing. I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next day, I reached out to a friend on the board of directors. I asked if they could clarify something for me about the no parking rule. When my friend asked what was up, I inquired if there had been any change to our no parking policy on the streets. My friend assured me that the rule was still very much in effect and asked why I was asking. I explained the situation and showed them the messages from the property manager. They were not happy. My friend on the board said this was completely unacceptable, that the property manager had no authority to make such statements without board approval, and that they would address this immediately. 2 days later, we all received an email from the board of directors. They reaffirmed the no parking policy and announced that the property manager had been let go due to repeated instances of overstepping his authority and misrepresenting board policies. I felt a bit bad that the guy lost his job, but at the same time I was relieved. Having someone that incompetent in charge of our community's safety was a disaster waiting to happen. The following week I noticed a contractor's van parked on the street again. This time I didn't hesitate. I called the fire department, which was just a mile away. They came out, took one look at the situation, and issued a violation to the contractor. As I watched the contractor grudgingly move his van, our new property manager approached me. The new manager thanked me for calling this in and emphasized that they take the safety of residents very seriously. I replied that I was just glad to see the rules being enforced properly again. The new property manager agreed and added that the board had asked them to personally thank me for bringing the previous situation to their attention. They said my vigilance had potentially prevented a serious safety hazard. It had been a frustrating experience, but in the end, it led to positive change in our community. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.